program and the members of the Ziegler Committee for their continued work in supporting the university mission of diversity, cultural development, and transformative learning. Their efforts and sponsored events enrich our campus greatly. Today, I want to offer my special thanks to them and our guest speaker for making sure that we remember the 6 million Jews who died in Nazi concentration camps during World War II. That remember what happens when hatred becomes a way of life. Stephanie Marks was born in Poland, and just before the start of the war, her family relocated to Belgium. While visiting family in her native Poland, World War II broke out, and her family made an escape and endured numerous trials in an effort to gain entrance to the United States. In 1941, through the U.S. Embassy in Poland, her family was granted relocation to Cincinnati. Here to share her lessons from the Holocaust, boldness in the face of evil, please welcome Stephanie Marks.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Thank you, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here today. I am a Holocaust
keep this in front of you.
I'm wired.
Yeah, you got to keep that in front of you. You may have to, here, hold this one. Hold that one instead. Just you're going to have to hold that one.
You're going to take it up.
Yeah, I'll switch the batteries and you get that one.
Excuse me, we have to switch procedures. Again, I want to thank you for being here today. I'm not a speaker, I'm a storyteller. Lost my train of thought. Anyway, I am a Holocaust survivor. I do not have a number on my arm tattooed, and I was not in a concentration camp, but I am a survivor. And my journey was 7,000 miles long, 6 cities, 6 states, 6 countries, and, probably 2 continents, at least 2 continents. And my story starts in Konin, Poland. That is where I was born. Can we have... I was born in Konin, Poland in 1925. And my paternal grandparents were Hasidic Jews, which means they were very, very Orthodox Jews. They wore a habit, they wore a beard. The women, after marriage, had to shave their heads and wear a wig. Actually, they had 3 wigs. They had one for every day, they had one for the holidays, and they had one that they slept in. Not so sure they had a third, but they did have 2. They were very, very religious. My father, in his younger years, also was a Hasid, dressed as you... He dressed as you can see, and he was working for his father. At that time, he was traveling throughout Poland and Switzerland and Germany. They owned a textile factory and a lace factory, and he would sell merchandise to wholesalers throughout these countries. Now, my mother, on the other hand, these maternal grandparents were also Orthodox Jews, but not Hasidim. They believed in the Jewish religion, they were Orthodox, they were kosher, but they dressed more the Polish way or European way, and their way of life was much more European than it was Jewish Orthodox. Now, when my mother became of age, and they owned a flour mill and an oil refinery. Now, when she became of age, marriageable age, there was no one suitable in this small town of Konin for such a young woman. So they hired a shadchan, which is in English a matchmaker. And she went out and located my father's family, who were also well-to-do. My father was educated mostly in Jewish matters. He went to a Jewish school. He spoke Hebrew. He spoke Yiddish. But his father knew that he needed someone to be more of the outside world. So they sent him to a Jewish parochial school where he was able to learn Polish and some German also. So this matchmaker thought this would be a great match, a good-looking, wealthy young man with a good-looking, wealthy young woman, and she was going to make a nice commission. So she introduced the two families. My father and his parents came to visit my mother, and my mother took one look at them, and she was horrified. She said, "No, this will never do. I will not shave my head. I will not be a Hasidic wife. Absolutely not. It's out of the question." And they said, "Well, we'll have to find someone else." So my father was smitten with her, and he went back with his parents, and he said, "Look, I need to shave this beard. I need to become more civilized. I want to marry this young woman." So his parents reluctantly, but they did give him permission to change his habit, wear regular clothes, and shave his beard. And he went back to see my mother, and she thought, well, he's quite a changed young man. And the marriage was arranged. They were married. Then I was born. Now, he lived in Konin with my mother after the marriage. And several years later, I was born. I was born in 1925. And a few years after I was born, he got notice from the Polish military that he had to report to the army. Well, in Poland, if a Jew reported to the army, it was almost like a death sentence. For some reason or other, they never reappeared again. They disappeared somewhere. So he felt, no, he was not going to disappear. He wanted to go on living. And most of the men who were Jewish men who were requested to report, they mutilated themselves. They would cut off an ear or punch out an arm or cut off a toe, anything, so they wouldn't have to go to the army. He refused to do that. Now, he had a sister who was married and had three children living in Brussels, Belgium. So he thought, okay, he's just going to leave the country and he's going to go on to Belgium. And he told my mother, you stay here, I'll go to Belgium, I'll see if we can make a life for ourselves. And he did go ahead and do that. Moved on to Belgium, went into business with his sister's husband. They were also in the textile business. Now, I'm sorry for not coordinating. It's the first time I've ever used this modern contraception. So it is a contraception. This happens to be my mother's brother in the yard of our flour mill. And if you see in the background, there is a wagon standing back there. And I show this picture because I will be speaking about this wagon. So anyway, he went to Belgium and he came back several months later and he said, you know, we can make a life for ourselves, a good life for ourselves in Belgium. Why don't you come to Belgium with me and we will establish a home, then we'll come back and pick up the child. So she agreed to do that. She was very attached to her family and she really hated doing that. But she did. And I was left in Poland with my grandparents. Now, I was the only grandchild. They doted on me. They adored me. I adored my grandfather. And the things that I remember, some of them are sad and some of them are good. My uncle used to take me riding on his motorcycle, and my grandmother was dying because he would take a basket and put pillows around it, these feather pillows we used to have, stick me in there and take me off on the motorcycles, and she didn't know if I was ever going to come back. My grandfather, on the other hand, would take me back to the factory, and as I said, we had a flour mill. So the peasants would come in these wagons with grain, and they would bring the grain. We would turn it into flour, put it into sacks, and there was a large iron slide going down from the second floor of the factory into these wagons and shoot the sacks, flour sacks down. And in those days, we didn't have slides and all these toys that children have today. So my greatest wonderful experience was my grandfather taking me up to the second story, and when there was a wagon full of nice soft flour sacks, he would shoot me down the chute. And that was, I mean, you know, for a 5-year-old, that was really sensational. So also my grandmother was very devoted to me, and I was always asking for things. And I wanted a pet, and she said to me, "Oh, my child, you can't have a dog because dogs have fleas. And you can't have a cat because the cats we had were running around the factory catching mice. So we can't have that." But she said, "You know, we have some farm animals running around the courtyard, and if you want a little goose, well, we have a little goose and you can have that, but you have to keep it outside." So I did. I adopted this little goose, and she followed me wherever I went. And one day I got a little too friendly with the goose. I hugged it, wrung its neck, and that was the end of the goose, was the end of pets, period. So anyway, I lived with them for almost a year. Then my mother came back, and she reclaimed me. By the way, this is a picture of the synagogue in Kanin. And that also brings back going back a little, that brings back some memories. In an Orthodox synagogue, the men sit downstairs, the women separately on a second floor, or over on the side behind a curtain. So women are not allowed to sit with the men. But my grandfather was quite wealthy, donated a lot of money to the synagogue, so he could do pretty much what he wanted. And he wanted his granddaughter to sit next to him. Well, they weren't going to argue with my grandfather. So, and the men wear these talits, which are these prayer shawls, these large prayer shawls. And I would be so proud sitting next to him, the only little girl in the whole synagogue with her grandfather. And when it came time for the blessing, you bless your children, you bless your wife. When it came time to bless the children, he would stand up, gather me to him, take his prayer shawl, wrap it around the both of us, and bless me. And I have never forgotten the feeling of that blessing. And I'm thinking now, maybe 70 years later, he truly blessed me because here I am, a survivor of the Holocaust. So anyway, my mother came to get me. We went to Belgium. Now, to get to Belgium, we traveled all through Germany and finally ended up in Brussels. She had established a home for us. And I met for the first time my uncle, my aunt, 3 little cousins. I spoke Polish and Yiddish. They spoke only French. So we couldn't communicate very much, and it was 3 against 1. They made my life a pretty living hell. But I was a fighter already then, and I gave it as good as I took. So before long, we became very good friends. I also for the first time in my life, got to play with other children. I was enrolled in school. I learned French very quickly. I had no problem learning languages. And life was very, very good. We were a very close-knit family. We lived next to each other. We took vacations together. Again, going back.
Keep that up there so everybody can hear you.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I want to go back a little bit because, as I say, this is the first time I've done this and I'm not coordinated. This is the square where our house stood. Most of the houses then were little huts with straw roofs, no running water, no toilets, outdoor commodes, and this very famous pump. And this pump still stands today. This is my mother when she went to the Lyceum. That's a Jewish high school. At that time, girls did not go to school. Boys went to Cheder, which was a Jewish school. Girls didn't go to school, most of them. But in Kanin, they did have a Jewish parochial school for girls. So this is a picture of her in school. Now, this is my father and my mother. And this is a collage of me at 1, me at 2, me at 4, and me at 5. Pride and joy of my grandparents. I have hundreds of these pictures. I won't bore you with only these. Now, this is my mother in Belgium. This is my father and I in Belgium in front of the Palace Hotel, which still stands. And this is my mother and father in 1938. That's 1 year before the war broke out. And we had a summer home in Blankenberg, which is a summer resort in Belgium. And we owned a villa with the other family, with his sister and brother-in-law, and their children. And this is me and my mother, and this is one of the cousins. That is a school picture going on a school outing, school trip. Another one on a school trip. Life was wonderful. It was free. It was free of fear, free of financial worries. I spoke the language. I had my family around me. It was probably one of the best times of my life. And that was 1938. And then came 1939. And instead of going to the seashore at the end of May, first part of June, we decided to go back to Poland to visit the family. We used to go like every 2-3 years, we would go back. And we picked 1939 to go back to see the family. Can everybody hear me back there? Yeah? Anyway, we were in Brussels. In order to get to Kanin, Poland, we had to travel across all of Germany to Kanin in Poland, which was on the German border. Now, in May and June, there was no problem. Now, we knew that already the Germans were persecuting the Jews in Germany. And the way we knew that is because a few of the Jewish German families who were able to flee, the only way they could flee is with a suitcase and a few belongings. They left their lives, their homes, their families, their money behind. All they came was with a little suitcase, a couple of Deutsche Marks, and their children across the border. They had to come across like the Mexicans come across today, crawl across. And they arrived in Belgium penniless. So the Jews in Belgium gave them a home. I know we took in innumerable Jewish refugees. We fed them, we housed them, we took care of them until they were able to find a job or lodging of their own. And we heard the horror stories. It was already after Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass. So we knew what was going on in Germany. But we thought, oh, we're on a Belgium train, we're safe. So we did cross Germany, arrived safely in Poland, and we were there about a month when we started getting phone calls from my uncle in Brussels saying, hey, you better get back because there's a war coming and they're going to attack Poland, number one. So we went and tried to find a way out, and we were dillying and dallying. We didn't quite believe them, and we thought, oh, we got time to get out. Well, before you know it, we woke up in the morning and the bombs were falling on Cunning. The Germans were marching in. So we heard, okay, now we got to get out. We got to go. So where do you go? We figured, okay, Cunning is over here, and Warsaw is over here, maybe 350 miles. We had family in Warsaw. Well, we couldn't use a car because gasoline was not available, so my uncle thought, okay, we'll go out and we know all the farmers around, they're our clients. We'll buy a couple of wagons and 4 horses and we'll pack our belongings. You know, how long is it going to last? We're going to be free in no time. Just take the necessities. So they did. They went out and they were able to get 2 wagons, 4 horses, which they brought back. And we packed a few things on there. The only thing that we did do is every wealthy family in Poland had gold, usually gold pieces, gold coins, some diamonds, some money, and we thought, well, we can't drag all that with us, so we have to bury it. Well, we didn't know who was ever going to come back, so we had to bury it in a place that people, the family would remember, and the best possible place was right under the slide, because who's going to go look under a slide? And of course, the ground were little bricks, stones. So we did. We buried some of the very valuables under that slide. Now, I happen to have gone back about 6 or 7 years ago, and everybody said, oh, did you dig up the stuff? And I said, no, I don't want to see it. I don't want to know it. It's still there. As far as I know, if you want to go look for it, it's there. Under the slide, remember. Anyway, we got on the wagons and we started on the road to Warsaw. Because we thought Warsaw's the capital, we're going to be safe there. So we got on there, we got on the road, and it was pandemonium. Hundreds and thousands of people in wagons, on bicycles, on foot, going from the north to the south, from the south to the north, from the east to the west. Nobody knew where they were going. They were just fleeing away from the Germans. The Polish army, there were cavalry, that's all they had was horses. They were fleeing. It was the 3rd day of the war, and they were fleeing already. And the Germans were constantly flying overhead. They were machine gunning us on the road. The villages were bombed out. There was no food. There was no water. There was no schools. There were no shops. There was nothing. It was total mayhem. The roads were littered with dead people. There was no place to bury them. There was no hospitals open. There was nothing to take care of them. The only food we were able to manage is very early in the morning, we'd run out in the fields and dig up potatoes and radishes and whatever was growing in the ground. And the Germans would come and machine gun us as we were digging for the food. They'd machine gun the wagons. People were hanging from telephone posts, horses. It was really a very horrible time. I think I was numb at that time. I didn't really understand what was going on. You know, I had a mother and father to protect me, and but as the years go by and I look back on that experience, I see now how terrible it is and was. And I'm looking at pictures of Darfur and other tragedies, and I say, my God, will it ever end? It's all over again. We've learned nothing from this lesson. Nothing. So anyway, this is a picture of Konin. The minute the Germans came into Konin, the very next day, they took the rabbi. He had to bring all the treasures from the synagogue, the books, all of our treasures, in the middle of the street. They set it all on fire and they killed him. Then they took a large portion of the people who were left, Jews who were left there, lined them up against the walls and machine gunned them. If we had stayed, we would not have survived. Actually, very, very few people from Konin survived, very few. There is a book written about this by someone who interviewed all the survivors that he could find throughout the world. I wasn't interviewed, he never found me, but he did find a lot of them, and there is a book called Konin, and each family that survived, they described their experiences. So we were on the road for, maybe a week, 10 days. And of course, there came a time we just couldn't, and when I say we, I don't mean just my little family. I'm talking about hundreds of people, Jews and non-Jews alike. We got tired, we got hungry, we thought, all right, we have a little money, we saw a village in a part of, between Konin and Warsaw that was called Puszcza Kampinoska. So we stopped there, and we asked the farmer if he would put us up, if he could give us some food, and yeah, sure, you know, it's going to cost, but at least we can do it. And again, it wasn't just us, it was many, hundreds of people. So we did find a farmer who said, yeah, we'll lodge you and we'll give you some milk and some eggs and some bread. And so we stopped to rest overnight, and the next morning we heard German tanks coming. We thought, uh-oh, the Germans are coming, what do we do now? Well, before we had any idea to answer the question, they were running from house to house, yelling, Juden raus, Juden raus, Jews out, Jews out. Well, it wasn't just the Jews that had stopped, it was also non-Jews had stopped. But everybody rushed out. So they said, Jews over here, non-Jews over there. And fortunately, our family had no choice. They had, you couldn't cheat, because the identity papers in Poland, Germany, and other countries, if you were a Jew, you had a big red J on your identity card. We had passports from Belgium, so Belgium did not differentiate. So what we did is we pretended we were not Jews, and we had these passports with us. So we stood over on the side of the non-Jews. When they had separated the Jews from the non-Jews, they picked a dozen or more Orthodox Jews, the ones they could recognize them. They had the beards, they had the habit. They tied their beards to the tanks and they dragged them through the streets. Of course, most of them were dead. They untied them, beat them, and left. So the Jewish people went out, and this was a day before Rosh Hashanah, which is a high holiday. So they buried the Jews, and at that point, our family decided we're not going to Warsaw. We didn't think that we could, because we had heard Warsaw was totally destroyed. Our family, we had no idea where they were. Maybe the house was still standing, maybe not. So we thought, okay, they wanted to go to Warsaw. My father and mother said, no, we're going to go to Lodz. Now, Lodz was back east some. He had family in Lodz because that's where he came from. And Lodz was a big industrial city. We knew the Germans wouldn't destroy Lodz because they needed that industry. So we got on the wagons, they went to Warsaw. That was the last time we ever saw them. We never saw them again. We did hear from them, but we never saw them again. So we went on to Lodz. When we got to Lodz, the family took us in, and for a few weeks, it was fine. We had no problems there. Then all of a sudden, it started. They knew where the Jewish quarters were because in all cities in Poland, the Jews would live in certain sections, not because they were ghettos, but because it was close to the synagogue, close to their kosher butcher shops, close to their friends, also for security reasons, because there were pogroms in Poland at times. So they knew wherever there was a synagogue in the city, the houses around there, they must be Jews. So in the middle of the night, they would come pounding on the doors, Juden raus, Jews out. And they would line us out on the street. They would come up the stairs or down the stairs, just steal whatever they could steal that was of value, just bang up whatever else was left, and come out, shoot a couple of Jews, and home they went, and maybe the next day they'd come back. Maybe it was 2 days or 3 days, but they always came back. So at that point, we thought, well, no, can you go back? Back. One more. Okay. So anyway, we realized that we no longer were even safe with the family in Lodz. And they said, you know what? We have some friends who are not Jewish, and we're going to see if they would hide you. Well, if you hid a Jew, and the Germans found out about it, they not only shot the Jew, they also shot the family that was hiding you. So it wasn't such an easy decision to make. But some of the people were generous enough, kind enough, that they would hide you. And they said, yeah, you can come over, we'll keep you safe for a while. We'll see how long we can keep you safe. So we moved in with them. Now, very shortly after that, my mother, who was really the heroine of this story, she was a remarkable human being, not just because of this, but in general. Her whole life was really a true, magnificent story. So one day she woke up and she said to my father, you know, I heard that Himmler is in Lodz. Now, Himmler was Hitler's right hand, and whenever a big city was conquered, he would send Himmler out there to establish a German government in that city. So it wasn't such an impossible situation. They thought, oh, all right. She says, you know, I'm going to go to Himmler. I'm going to get us out of here. And he says, Paula, you're insane. They'll kill you. You can't go. She says, I'm going. I'm taking the child. You look Jewish, you stay home. I'm taking Sefuka, and we're going to get out of this hell. And she put on her best dress. She didn't have much left at that point, but she put on her best dress. She got me all dressed up. We took a streetcar, got on the streetcar, got off in front of the German headquarters, and we walked up to the entrance, and there was a soldier standing there with a bayonet, and he said, what do you want here? She says, I have an appointment with Herr Himmler. Now, you have to know the German mentality. And again, it's not all Germans, but on an average, the German mentality does not argue with a higher up. If the higher up says jump, they jump. So when she said, you know, I have an appointment with Herr Himmler, he wasn't going to argue with her. He said, just a minute. He goes in, he comes back out, he says, follow me. And we followed him up this gorgeous, huge staircase, came into a room almost as big as this, swastikas all over the place, pictures of Hitler all over the place. And we're standing there, she and I, excuse me, and out comes this tall, handsome German officer in an SS uniform, the boots, the whole works. Heil Hitler. And my mother just kind of went like this. And she had told me, she says, you do not open up your mouth. You don't say a word. So he looks at her and he says, what are you doing here? And she was no taller than I am. And she looks up at him, and I'll never forget that look on her face. She says, is this the way an educated German officer speaks to a woman? And the man was speechless. He looked at her, he said, in German, she spoke a fluent German. He says, please excuse me, but the war does something to a human being. Please have a seat. And he made us sit down. He called his adjutant, helper, to bring coffee and tea and hot chocolate for the little girl and cookies for the little girl. And again, he said to her, why are you here? And she whipped out this passport and my father's, because she had one, he had one. And she says, well, she says, I want your permission to get out of this terrible land. He said, well, why are you here? What are you doing here? Because he knew we had come from Belgium. She says, well, she was a quick thinker. She says, well, to tell you the truth, I have rheumatoid arthritis very badly. And in Poland, there is a town called Ciechocinek that has these smelly baths, these hot baths, mud baths. And every couple of years, my husband brings me here so that I can take the baths and cure my rheumatoid arthritis. So he's flipping through the passport, and sure enough, he sees entries and exits and entries and exits, which we were doing all these years. Didn't say we were going to Ciechocinek. And he looks and he looks and he says, I understand. He says, where is your husband? She said, oh, my husband is just getting over typhus. Now, typhus was rampant at that time, and it was a deadly contagious disease. And she says, you know, he's just getting over it, and I wasn't going to bring him here and infect the whole German army. So he said, oh, you're so smart, you're so smart. He thought she was something terrific. He says, well, let me have your passports. So we gave him his passports, and he wrote, as we call it in Yiddish, a megillah, a whole bunch of stuff. And he stamped it, and he said, okay, when are you ready to leave? Mama said, tomorrow, anytime. He said, well, you know, there are no trains running except military transport trains. Would you be afraid to travel on a military transport? And she said, not with your permission, I wouldn't be. He said, fine, I will see to it that tomorrow there will be a first-class compartment saved up for you and your family so you could go safely home to Belgium. Because this train goes to Berlin and all the way straight back to Belgium. Okay, keep going. All right. So here we are. And he tells his adjutant, he said, you will pick this family up tomorrow. I'll make arrangements for a first-class compartment to be available for them tomorrow. So he took us home, the chauffeur took us home, And we packed, we said goodbye to the family, and the next morning he picked us up, and we got on the train with about 3,000 German soldiers. And of course, there was a compartment vacated for us. So we got settled, and we were scared. But they were extremely curious because nobody traveled on transport trains in Poland, or in Germany for that matter. And they wondered, who are these people? Are they royalty? Are they somebody special? Who are they that we had to vacate this first-class compartment for them? So they weren't bashful either. They came knocking on the little door that slides open, and they introduced themselves very politely, and they wanted to know, who were we and where were we going? And we were afraid not to tell them the truth. We said, well, we were being repatriated to Belgium. We were afraid that they would ask for our passports, and in here it would show that we were from Belgium. So we told them the truth. We're going back home to Brussels. Oh, you're going to Brussels? Give us your address. We're going to see you there very soon. And they brought me teddy bears. They bought me. They were on vacation. They were going back on furlough. And they were taking home all sorts of things. So they gave me gifts. And, oh, we'll see you in Brussels. We'll see you in Brussels. And we thought, oh, my God, they are not kidding. They are going to invade Belgium. When we got to the Belgian border, we knew they were in business because there were thousands of tanks and ammunition and soldiers facing Belgium. So as soon as we got to Belgium, we said, we've got to get out of here. Absolutely have to get out of here. Well, we dillied and we dallied, and we really didn't get around to doing much. We had a car, but my father didn't know how to drive. He had a man who did the driving. And my uncle and his family, they were going to leave with us. Well, it so happened that, we dillied and we dallied. In the meantime, my class was supposed to go on an outing. Because in Europe, in the spring, you go to different countries as an exchange student. And in May, I was supposed to go, and you know how you are a child before you go on an outing, you're kind of nervous, and I woke up in the morning, I was supposed to leave that morning, and I said, gee, it's thundering, but that's funny because the sun is shining. How can it be sunny? And, then I opened up the windows, and I realized that wasn't the thunder, that was bombs. I mean, I knew the sound of bombs. I knew what bombs sounded like. So I ran into my parents' bedroom, and I said, listen, they're bombing Brussels. And my mother says, no, you're having a nightmare again. Go back to sleep. And I said, so my father wakes up, he says, what's this commotion about? And I said, Papa, they're invading Brussels. They're bombing us. And he gets up, he goes to the window, and as he turns the radio on, the news comes over the radio, total mobilization, all men to report to the army. And we thought, okay, here we go again. And so he called my uncle, and we said, listen, we got to get out of here. We got to get out of here today, now. Well, money's in the bank, jewelry's in the bank, all the goodies are in the bank. So the man said, we're going to go to the bank, get all these goodies out, and you women start packing. Don't pack foolishness. Pack things that are value, things that are meaningful. So we started packing. They come back and they said, we're really out of luck. The bank never opened. It's wartime. Banks are closed. Forget about everything we had in the vault. It's gone. So we had some money in the safe in the business, and we piled into the car, all of us into one car. There were 2, 3 is 5, and the 3 of us, 8 people plus the driver. All the stuff piled up on the roof of the car. And we started, where do you go? You go to France. Oh, France got a Maginot Line. They'll never get across that. We will be safe in France. So we thought, okay, we'll go to Paris. We get to the French border, and they said, sorry, are you Jews? And we said, yeah. He said, sorry, we don't want you. Go back home. Said, no, we can't. We have to go. No, no, you can't go. You can't go. We argued, we pleaded, we begged. Finally, one of the officers said, okay, if the men join the French army, the women and children can go. We thought, that is not going to do at all. So they argued some more, they pleaded some more. Finally, an officer came out and he said, you know, if you two families, if each one of you gives us 10,000 francs, we'll give it to the Red Cross and you can go. Well, we knew it wasn't going to the Red Cross, it was going in the pocket. But who cares? You gotta do what you gotta do. So we paid him off, and we get to Paris, and it was horrible. The city was crammed wall to wall with refugees from all over. There wasn't a hotel room to be had. People were sleeping on the floors in the streets. We finally managed to get a room in a boarding house. And the next morning we woke up and the bed bugs were crawling up the walls, the roaches were running all over. And my mother said, I cannot live like that. We're getting out of Paris. Well, where are we going to go? I thought, okay, we'll be safe going to the south of France. And so here we are, we're in Belgium, up there, and we thought, okay, we'll go to the south of France. We'll go to Marseille, because Marseille is it's a port town, and we heard that ships were going to Africa, they were going to Brazil, they were going to Israel, and maybe we could get on one of these ships and flee. So from Paris, we got in the car, and we went to Marseille. We stopped in Marseille, which is in the south of France, and we went to the consulate, nothing. There was nothing we could do, so we said, okay, the next thing we're going to do, we're going to go from Marseille to Dax, which is a resort town in the south of France. The Germans probably won't get there. We'll be safe there. So in order to get from Marseille to Dax, we had to cross the Pyrenees, which are the mountains. We get halfway up the mountains, and the chauffeur stops the car. And he says, you know, you Jews, you have money. I know you have money because you paid off the French. Now, you want to come out of this alive? I want some money. Otherwise, you're staying right here and you die in the mountains. Well, what do? You pay. So we paid him. He got us to Dax. And at that point, it was hard to get gas anyway. So my father said to him, you know what? We don't have any more money. You can have the car. Take the car, go, be gone. We've never seen him since. We don't know whatever happened, and really we don't care. So we get to Dax, and we're there a few weeks, and again, it's pandemonium. Thousands and thousands of refugees from all over the world are down there hiding out again. And then we hear that the Maginot Line fell, and that Germany was winning, and they were coming down to the south of France. So we thought, okay, what do we do? And again, when I say we, thousands of people. I thought, okay, we'll go to Spain. By that time, there were no transportation. So we ditched a lot of the stuff, took a suitcase apiece, and lines, hundreds, thousands of people marching from the south of France to the Spanish border. Spain had just gotten over a civil war, and they were in very bad shape. So when we get to the border, there was a bridge and a river, and the soldiers were standing there, bayonets out. You can't come in. We can't use you. You cannot come in. Spain cannot have you. So again, no food, no water, no toilets, no medication, no nothing. People crying, screaming. They jumped in the river trying to swim across. They got shot at. And there we were. Where do you do? Where do you go? You can't go back. You can't go forward. There was nowhere to go east. There was nowhere to go west. We just stood there like animals. And finally, a Spanish lieutenant comes on the bridge with a megaphone, And he said, I need your attention. We have made a deal with Portugal. Portugal, a little nothing country, the most blessed country in the world. They decided that they would take in every refugee they could get a hold of. Spaniard says, well, they can't cross Spain because they're going to jump off in Spain and stay in Spain. If you send trains for them, Portuguese trains to pick them up, seal the trains while they cross Spain, you're going to have them. And they did. This little nothing country sent train after train after train. They packed us in like sardines. They sealed the doors. They sealed the windows. Now, not like the trains going to Auschwitz. They just sealed them so we couldn't open them and get off. And we finally arrived in Portugal. In Portugal, they said people with money over here, people with no means over here. They placed everybody, the people who had no money, the Portuguese, they fed them, they clothed them, they gave them shelter. People with money, they found homes for us, they found lodging for us. We ended up in a little resort town called Coimbra. And for Coimbra, we had to report every week to the police department because they didn't want to lose track of us. Then from there, they sent us to Porto, and from Porto to Lisbon. Now, when we got to Lisbon, there were, people from all over the world, but a lot of Jewish people there. And Portugal at that time, and for many years even before that, was the center of espionage. All the spies in the world met in Portugal. That's where they were transacting their business. So Portugal was used to a little shenanigans and scandal and foreigners. They also had a huge casino, almost as famous as Monte Carlo. And people from all over the world, wealthy people, came to gamble there. So they were used to foreigners and commotion and intrigue. And they weren't afraid of taking in all these strangers. But when we got to Lisbon, most of the Jewish families by then were in dire straits already. I mean, we'd been on the road for a year and a half. And we were running out of money, we were sick, it was a pretty desperate situation. So we started again, going from consulate to consulate to consulate, and they said, forget it, you can't do it. Finally, the American consulate got orders from Washington, from the State Department. If the Jews come up with $3,000 per person in the family, you can give them visas to come to the United States, because they figured with $3,000 per person, we won't be awarded a state. We have enough for at least last us a year until we find jobs and so on. So that's when we decided, okay, the people who had the money, that was great, but a lot of people didn't have that kind of money. So a committee was formed, of which my father was one of the members, and they said, we're going to pool our money. Everybody bring their money, we'll give you a receipt for the money, we'll put it in the bank. And family A needs $9,000, we'll take $9,000, we give it to you. You go to the consulate, you show them the money, you get a visa, you bring the money back. And that worked like a charm. A lot of people got their little passports to come to the United States. Well, the State Department finally said, these Jews can't have that much money. Something is going on there. So they revoked the consulate, they send him back to the United States, send another man in, and he was to stamp the money. So we thought, okay, now we're really cooked our goose because, you know, you stamp the money. How much money is there anyway? So we thought, okay, now my father and the committee went to the bank to get the money out, give everybody their money back. And the president of the bank came out. He said, what are you doing? Why are you taking this money out? And I said, well, they stamped the money. And he said, don't be silly. He says, bring me your stamped dollars. We've got millions of fresh American dollars. And the thing started all over again. So a lot of Jews saved themselves that way. In the meantime, my mother had gone through her files of papers and scraps of papers, and she had found the, this is pictures of me in Portugal. This is the boat that we came on, finally. Anyway, my mother found this, and she wrote to our family in Cincinnati, who were like third or fourth cousins, told them our story, and they said, oh, they would be delighted to sponsor us. Now, if you had someone to sponsor you, that meant they guaranteed that they would not become awarded the American people. The family was going to support you. So it took about 3 months before the papers went back and forth, and our papers came, and we finally ended up on the boat Sepa Pinto, and our voyage to the United States. Arrived in New York, and the very next day, we got on a train to come to Cincinnati. In Cincinnati, the entire family, now this is on the boat, that's my father over there, and me sitting like this. By the way, just to interject, this is one letter that we received when we were already in Cincinnati. We had written to people in Cunning to see what had happened, and they said, this card said to us, no one is left, everybody's gone. That was the end. This is the family that brought us here. Now, this is all the family. I'm there with the pearls that I'm still wearing around my neck, and my husband is over here. This is my wedding. Now, my husband happens to have been like a fourth or fifth cousin. His father and mother are the cousins who brought us here. It's my father, mother, and my son, Jack, who is now 62 years old. This is my father and my mother in the United States. I was married 29 years then to this first husband. Then I had a second husband, David, to whom I was married for 20 years. We had no children. That was David and I. And after David passed away, this was our first group picture. My son, my daughter-in-law, myself, my granddaughter, my other granddaughter, my daughter, her husband, and my grandson. And this is my grandson's bar mitzvah. This is when he becomes a man by Jewish law. And this is my daughter today. My daughter, her husband, my grandson, who's 21. My granddaughter, her husband, my 2 great-grandchildren. My other granddaughter, her husband, and her 2 children. This is my home where I was born in 1923. I went back to Kanin about 5 or 6 years ago, and there's the house I was born, just like it stood in 1923. There it is in 1991. Same house, same spot, except that when the Russians occupied, first the Germans occupied Kanin, then the Russians did, they chopped it up and made 7 apartments out of it. Yeah, that's it. I'm just going to take one more minute to tell you a little story about my going back. I had sworn I would never go back. I didn't want to have anything to do with this country or anything else. And then I heard that there was a book published called Cunning by an author who went around and found survivors, interviewed them from Cunning, survivors of Cunning, and he wrote a story about them. And in this book, he talks about the flour mill and about one family that my grandfather saved economically. And his name, and he's in the United States. He's a multimillionaire in Dallas, Texas, has a scrap business. And I got on the phone and called him. And my God, you would think that he just won the $1 million lottery. So we were on the phone for quite a while, and he says, you know, I go back all the time. I take tours of people there. I want them to show Cunning. I said, well, what's with my house? What's with the mill? What's with everything? He says, it's all there. So I don't know, I got kind of homesick, and I thought, well, maybe I will go back. And our rabbi was taking a tour, 36 people, called a heritage tour of Poland, Germany, Hungary, the concentration camps, and Poland. So I decided to go on the tour, and we ended up in Warsaw, and I hired a car and a driver who spoke Polish and English, because my Polish is gone. And we went back. I told him, I said, we had 3 days in Warsaw. So I hired him to pick me up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and we drove to Cunning. And I went back to my old house, standing right there. I had a picture of it next to me on the seat, and we found the house. Now, I had a nanny in Poland that helped raise me. And when we left, we gave her and the family a key to our house. And we said, you watch the house for us while we're gone. And I wondered, was she still there? So we went to the house, and sure enough, her name was on the doorbell. And we got the concierge, the woman who took care of the property, after she wanted to be bribed, and she wanted so much money to open up the door. And I told her, if you don't open that door, I'm going to go to the police. I'm the owner of this house, and you'll be out. You'll be out in 2 seconds, so open the door. And she did. She opened the door, and we said, where is this woman's apartment? She says, up on top. So we climbed the steps, we knocked on the door. I don't speak Polish, my translator and driver does. And an old man comes out, and he tells him in Polish who I am. And he just started crying, and he remembered me as, as a child and as a 14-year-old. And I said to him, ask him if his mother is still alive. She was my nanny for years. So he says, yeah, but she's old and she's not all there, and she sometimes doesn't even recognize me. So I said, well, I want to see her. And I walked in there, and she was sitting in a little rocking chair with a babushka on her head, and she was rocking back and forth. And he goes up to her and he taps her on the shoulder, and he says, in Polish, he says to her, Mama, Pani Kowalska is here, calling me by my mother's maiden name. And I bent over her, and I said to her, Nanushka, it's Stefulka. And she stopped rocking. She put her hands together, and she said in Polish, Boże moje, my God. And 2 tears came down. I lost it. I lost it then, and I'm losing it now. And her son said, this is my mother, and she's lived with me for 6 That was, we didn't invest in stocks. We invested in gold or in diamonds, in platinum. And those were things that, you know, you could trade with on the market. But we were pretty much out of everything by the time here.
That's how you traded.
Right.
When somebody demanded X amount of money, you'd say,
Right.
take this ring.
Right,
take these earrings.
right, right. And you could trade something that was worth $10,000 for a couple of loaves of bread. It didn't matter. You didn't know if you were going to survive or not, so what difference does it make?
What about, did you worry about theft, I mean, were you, you know, were you, yeah, how, but even if you hid it, if people knew, you know, these people probably have money, weren't you constantly in danger of?
You only thought of one thing. Now, it's a little difficult for me to answer this because I was 14 years old. I depended on my parents to do the bargaining. But I knew that at that point, it doesn't matter. You live from day to day. So you don't worry about what's going to be a week from now. You just wonder about what's going to be. I want to live to tomorrow, because if I get to tomorrow, I may get to the next day. So you don't worry about it.
How was it like adjusting to, like, I know you had to move around from country to country and cities. How was it adjusting to America when you first?
How did I adjust to America? Well, I'm 85 years old. I was 15 when I came here. If you'll give me 2 minutes, I'll tell you how I'm adjusting. I arrive in Cincinnati. I'm 15 years old. I don't speak English. I speak French. I speak Yiddish. I speak Spanish. I speak Portuguese, but I don't speak English. One of the people who brought us here was a school teacher. And she said, you know what? You have been out of school for 2 years. You better get to work and start graduating. So you're going to start school tomorrow, summer school, because we came in June. And she couldn't find a school close to where we lived with them at that time. There was a part of Cincinnati called the West End, which was really like the slums of Cincinnati. Poor people lived there, black and white. And that was the only place she could find an opening for me. So she takes me down there that morning and turns me over to the principal. And he takes me to class, and I'm looking around, and I thought, oh my God. And he saw me pulling back. And he said, what's the trouble? And I said, Aborigines. And he says, what did you say? I said, I'm not going there. Aborigines. I had never seen a black child in my life. And there were 50 students in the class and 49 were black. I had seen black people in the movies, but I had never seen a black child. So I wouldn't go. He said, you'll be all right. Turns me over to the teacher. I sit down. I don't understand a word of what's going on. I come home. My aunt picks me up. I called her aunt. She picks me up. And I said, I'm not going back there. I'm not going back there. She says, oh, yes, you're going back there, because come September, you got to go to high school. You got to do 4 years in 2. We got to catch up. You're going back. Well, I went back, and she gave me money to buy my lunch, and I still looked like a greenhorn. We called foreigners greenhorns in those days. I had braids, Heidi braids, and a silk dress and platform shoes. And I went back the second day and the third day, and I spent my lunchtime in the washroom crying because I was hungry. I didn't know what to do. So one day, about the third or fourth day that I'm there, a young black girl comes in and she says, why are you crying? And I said, I'm hungry. She says, you have money? And I said, yeah. And I pulled out my money. She says, come with me. And she took me to the lunch line, and she showed me how to buy food and get through the lunch line, sat me down at the table with all her friends, and all of a sudden, you know, I had 50 friends. And And then she said to me, this is no good. And she took my braids apart, my hair came down, and I have naturally curly hair. It's like Shirley Temple, all curly cues. She says, oh, those shoes are no good. And she shows me her shoes, which were these loafers with the pennies in them, you know. And she says, oh, that dress, that's no good. You have to have a skirt, and you have to have a blouse. And so I went home that day, and I said, I'm not going back to school till I have shoes with pennies. And my aunt said, fine. And we went out that day, and she bought me a whole new wardrobe, went back the next day, and, well, I was all Americanized. So I did end up the summer session, and then came September, and it was time to go to high school. And that was a little eerie, you know. And I'm walking up the steps of my high school, and who's coming up the steps waving? Catherine Smith is waving, hey, I'm here. And I want you to know, this has been over 60 years, and we're still friends. She's come to my weddings, to my bar mitzvahs, to my funerals. I've gone to hers, and we're still friends, and we still laugh about the Heidi braids. Now, she has the afro, and I have the straight hair. Any other questions?
Over here.
Many times on this journey, there were times where it was as if you didn't believe, or the families didn't believe that the change was happening, or you dilly-dallied. Why was that?
Well, we dilly-dallied first in Konin when we heard from our family in Brussels that we had to get out. And again, we dilly-dallied in Brussels when it was time to get out and leave for France. And from then on, we never dilly-dallied again.
I had a question. You know, you came over here in 1941. What went through your head when America got involved totally in both theaters of war? Did that bring back some of those fears?
Actually, I didn't, because I was 16 years old, and I really was not involved. I had no brothers. We had no family in the military. I was only interested in one thing. I knew I had to get good grades. I knew I had to graduate. Knew I had to get a scholarship. I had to go to college. Education is very important in our family. And so I didn't think about that. I just thought about how am I going to get from one grade to the next. And I managed. I did 4 years in 2, graduated with honors, 5th in my class with an average of 95. I'm proud.
I wondered what you studied at college.
What most refugees' children study, psychology. That was the preferred, or medicine. A lot of them went into medicine. Psychiatry mostly.
My research has taught me that even in the early 1940s and things, when we were first getting involved in the war in this country, there were a lot of anti-Semitic feelings among people in the United States. Did you experience any of that as you were taking up residence here?
I never met anti-Semitism in this country. I knew it existed. I knew it even at that young age, that even if I didn't feel it, it was here. I knew. And people would say to me, oh, we don't have any anti-Semitism here. We love the Jews. We don't persecute the Jews. And I said, you know what? Every dog has fleas. You don't beat the Jews. You don't hate the Jews. Because you beat the blacks. You hate the blacks. So that's your flea. Any other question?
There's one more.
I've met several survivors in the past, and they've often talked about about forgiveness, but they had quite different experience than you being in the concentration camps. But I was wondering, did you have any feelings towards forgiveness or harbor any sort of hard feelings towards Germans afterwards?
Do I have feelings of forgiveness? It's hard to explain. If a murderer comes in your house and shoots your child, or your mother, or your father, are you ever going to forgive him? No. But time heals. And we have to survive, and we have to survive as a society, not as an individual, but as a society. So you can't go on hating forever. You have to say to yourself, okay, this was, and this is no more. And then comes Darfur. And you say, oh my God, it's back again. It's not against me, it's against somebody else. So you enroll in that fight, and you fight for Darfur. And then comes another country, South Africa, and you fight for them, and you speak for them. And it seems never to end. I hope someday we'll all know each other, we'll all love each other, we'll all get along. But in the meantime, do what you can while you can. And that's about the only way we're ever going to stop this. Now, I speak mostly to young students. And I tell them at the end of the session, I say, I want you to remember one thing. If you remember nothing else about my speech, I want you to remember this. I know your parents want you to get A's and B's and become doctors and lawyers and architects and all sorts of things. Become the best that you can. Because what you have up here, no one can ever take away from you. But if you don't have a heart to go along with this, you'll never be anything or anybody. Thank you.
Thank you for being a good audience, and thank you for being a wonderful storyteller. As you go out, you may wish to look at some of the photographs along the wall that Stephanie brought for you to see. And also, did you have some, there are some brochures over there, I think,
Yeah.
right? That portray the Cincinnati Holocaust.
We have a Holocaust Museum in Cincinnati. It's not like the Holocaust Museum in Washington. It's mostly artifacts and memories and portraits of people, actual survivors who now live in Cincinnati. We are more of an educational facility than we are a museum. It's a very interesting museum, but our goal is to be missionaries, if you want to call it. We go from school to school and we talk to the students and organizations, and we plead, please, please, let's put an end to this misery. Let's be human. Let's be what we can be and the best that we can be. Any of you come to Cincinnati, take one of these brochures. We're open every day except Saturday. We're free. If you call ahead of time, we'll have a docent there who will take you around and explain everything to you.
Thank you very much.